A decade ago, the world watched as Greece stared into the abyss of total bankruptcy. The experts said it was over. The euro was dead. But today, in 2026, Greece is doing something no one saw coming. They aren't just surviving, they're beating almost every major economy in Europe. How did the world's biggest financial disaster become its most unlikely success story? In the 2000s, the Greek debt crisis wasn't just a local problem, it was a global contagion. We're talking about a 25% drop in GDP, 27% unemployment, and a country essentially kept on life support by the IMF and the European Central Bank. Fast forward to 2026, and the headlines look different. While the rest of the Eurozone economy is flirting with stagnation, Greece is posting a budget surplus and seeing some of the highest growth rates in the EU. They've regained their investment grade status, meaning the big money is flowing back in. But this isn't just a story about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's a story of a radical, painful transformation. Today we're digging past the old headlines. We're comparing the dark decade of the austerity years to the digital Greece of today. We'll look at the specific reforms that worked, the high-volume investments from giants like Microsoft and Pfizer, and why the Greek economic miracle might actually be a blueprint for the rest of the world. If you want to understand the future of the European Union's financial stability, you have to look at Greece. Let's break down the comeback of the century, the genesis of the crash. To understand where Greece is now, we have to understand the original sin of 2001. When Greece joined the euro, it was like a small-town business getting a credit card with no limit. The country borrowed heavily, fueled by low interest rates that were intended for stable economies like Germany. By 2009, the mask slipped. The government admitted their deficit wasn't 6%, it was nearly 13%. This was the discovery moment that triggered a decade of chaos. Markets panicked. Suddenly, nobody wanted to lend to Greece. The sovereign debt crisis was born. What followed was a series of bailouts that came with a catch: austerity. This meant deep cuts to pensions, massive tax hikes, and a public sector that was gutted. For a U.S. audience, imagine if the Great Depression happened, but instead of a new deal to spend money, the government was forced to stop spending entirely. It was a downward spiral that lasted nearly 10 years. The analogy: the financial heart transplant. Explaining a liquidity crisis and debt restructuring can feel like reading a textbook, so let's look at it like this. Imagine a patient, let's call him the Greek economy, who has lived for years on high-sugar, high-fat fast food. That's the cheap debt. Eventually, his arteries clog and he suffers a massive heart attack. The doctors rush in, but they don't just give him a pill. They perform a financial heart transplant. It's a brutal, invasive surgery. They have to cut away the infected tissue, the inefficient state-owned companies, and the tax evasion culture. While the patient is on the table, he's incredibly weak. He's in a coma for years. The austerity was the post-op recovery. It was a strict, painful diet of nothing but kale and water. The patient hated it. He felt like he was starving. But slowly, the new heart started to beat on its own. The investment grade status we see today is the doctor finally giving the patient a clean bill of health and saying, "You can go back to the gym now." Only this time, the patient is training for a marathon, not looking for the nearest burger joint. Steel manning the opposition. Now, to be fair to the skeptics, back in 2015, the idea of Greece staying in the euro seemed like madness. The argument for a Grexit, Greece exiting the Eurozone, was actually quite logical. Critics argued that by staying in the euro, Greece was trapped in a straitjacket. They couldn't devalue their own currency to make their exports cheaper, and they couldn't set their own interest rates. Leading economists argued that Greece should return to the drachma, default on its debts entirely, and take the short-term pain of a total collapse to eventually rebuild a competitive, independent economy. They warned that by staying, Greece was signing up for decades of a poverty trap. They predicted that the debt-to-GDP ratio was mathematically impossible to pay back. From their perspective, the EU was simply kicking the can down the road, keeping a zombie economy on life support just to save the big foreign banks. For millions of Greeks who saw their pensions cut and their youth flee the country, the Grexit seemed like the only way to reclaim national sovereignty. It wasn't just a fringe theory, it was a battle for the soul of the country. The 2026 reality check. But here is where the story takes a turn that almost no one predicted. If you look at the data for 2026, the Grexit warnings didn't just miss the mark, they were flipped on their head. In 2015, Greece was a pariah. In 2026, Greece is an investment-grade magnet. Let's look at the then versus now numbers. In the mid-2010s, unemployment was a staggering 27%. By early 2026, it has plummeted to around 9%, its lowest level since the crisis began. And remember that impossible debt? Through a combination of record-breaking primary surpluses and robust economic growth, the debt-to-GDP ratio is falling faster than almost any other nation on earth. Money has a history, and it keeps repeating. Subscribe to the Money Echoes so you hear the echo before it hits. But the real unique factor, the thing that separates this from a standard recovery, is the digital transformation. While Germany and Italy are currently struggling with stagnation and aging industries, Greece used the EU Recovery Fund to leapfrog into the future. They didn't just fix the old system, they built a new one. Global tech giants like Microsoft have invested billions in Greek data centers. Pfizer turned Thessaloniki into a global digital hub. In 2026, Greece is growing at roughly 2.4%, while the powerhouse economies of the Eurozone are lucky to hit 0.5%. The sick man of Europe is now the one leading the sprint. The secret sauce, beyond the numbers. So, how did this happen? It wasn't just about cutting costs. It was about a radical top-down digital rebirth. Before the crisis, Greece was famous, or rather infamous, for its bureaucracy. If you wanted to start a business, you needed a mountain of paperwork and months of patience. That changed with the Digital Bible initiative. The Greek government moved over 1,500 services online. Suddenly what took weeks took seconds on a smartphone. This wasn't just a convenience. It was a stake through the heart of corruption. By digitizing the state, they made it harder for the old way of doing business to survive. This efficiency is a massive part of why foreign direct investment hit record highs. But there's a second, greener pillar to this miracle: energy. Greece has realized that its greatest natural resources aren't just marble and olives, it's the sun and the wind. By 2026, Greece has transformed into a burgeoning green energy hub. On certain days, 100% of the country's electricity is powered by renewables. By investing heavily in offshore wind and massive solar arrays, Greece is decoupling itself from the volatile gas prices that have crippled the rest of the Eurozone economy. Finally, there's the brain gain. For a decade, the story of Greece was the brain drain, the exodus of 500,000 of its brightest young doctors and engineers. But in 2026, the tide is turning. With the rise of remote work and the digital nomad visa, plus the arrival of high-paying tech jobs at Microsoft and Amazon's Greek headquarters, those same expats are moving back. They're bringing global expertise, venture capital, and a new energy back to Athens. This isn't just a recovery, it's a total rebranding of a nation. The lessons. The story of Greece from 2010 to 2026 is one of the most improbable arcs in modern history. It serves as a masterclass in resilience. It shows that even when a nation is written off by the entire world, when its banks are closed and its people are despairing, recovery is possible through a combination of brutal reform and forward-thinking innovation. But the Greek economic miracle is also a warning. It reminds us that fiscal health isn't something you can take for granted. It took 15 years of blood, toil, tears, and sweat to fix the mistakes of a single decade of easy credit. Today, as many Western nations grapple with rising debt and slowing growth, they are looking toward Athens not as a cautionary tale, but as a blueprint. Greece didn't just survive the storm, they learned how to build a better ship while they were in the middle of it. And that is why, in 2026, the most exciting economy in Europe isn't in the north. It's right here in the Mediterranean. If you found this deep dive into the Greek debt recovery helpful, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel reach more people. What do you think? Is the Greek model sustainable, or is this just another bubble? Let me know in the comments below. For more stories on the world's most incredible economic comebacks, subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. History does not just repeat, it rhymes. So make sure you are listening for the next Money Echoes. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.